From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, theZoomer, hosted by Libby Znaimer. Welcome to theZoomer. I'm Libby Znaimer. Today marks a pivotal and tragic anniversary, 1 year since Hamas terrorists perpetrated the October 7th attack on Israel. The images of that day are etched in our memory: terrorists bursting across the border, the Nova Music Festival, the murder of civilians, the continued bombings back and forth. But today I want to focus our discussion on the survivors, the hostages, the hope for the region, and the impact of anti-Semitism rising around the world. I'd like to introduce you to journalist and author Amir Tibon. He has a gripping first-person account of how his father rescued him and his family from the safe room where they were hiding while their border kibbutz, Nahal Oz, was under attack. Here is my interview with the author of The Gates of Gaza.
It's a Saturday morning, and I'm at my home in kibbutz Nahal Oz. It's a small community of 450 people that is situated 800 meters from the border with Gaza. My wife and I live there with our two daughters. We have a 3.5-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time. And at 6:30 in the morning, there is a barrage of mortars coming from nearby Gaza. Over the years that we have lived in Nahal Oz, we experienced, I don't want to say hundreds, but certainly high dozens of incidents like this, because Nahal Oz is part of the region of the Gaza border that has been bombarded by Hamas for more than 2 decades now. When they fire mortars in our direction, you have 7 seconds to reach shelter. We're not scared, we just do what we have to do. We run to the safe room, and in that safe room, our two daughters are sleeping, because what most families in this part of Israel do, they turn that safe room into the children's bedroom. And then if there's a siren at 6:30 in the morning, indicating a mortar about to land, the parents run to the children and not the other way around. And after 7 a.m., we begin to hear something different. We begin to hear automatic gunfire. And that has never happened to us before. And we hear 5 people outside our window shouting in Arabic, a language that I understand, and firing bullets through the big window into our living room, trying to break the glass and the blinds so they can come in. My wife and I try to keep the girls calm so that they don't panic and don't start shouting or yelling, because then the terrorists will hear us. With my phone, I call my parents who live in Tel Aviv. My father is a former retired general in the Israeli military. I just wanted to inform them of what was going on. But I also wanted, perhaps, that my father would be able to call some of his friends in the military and alert them to this reality that the terrorists are inside Nahal Oz. And indeed, for several minutes, that's what he tried to do. And that's when my parents say, okay, nobody's answering. There are terrorists inside the kibbutz, and they just decide to go there. From Tel Aviv to the Gaza border area, usually, is a drive of 1 hour and 10 minutes. And they took a pistol. My father took the pistol. My mom said, I will drive. And they just got on their way. But it didn't take them 1 hour and 10 minutes on that day. They start driving south. They're alone on the road. There are rockets flying above their heads, being shot towards central Israel. And they see 2 police cars basically blocking the road, and police officers taking firing positions behind them. And a bit in the distance, a white pickup truck with terrorists on it firing back toward the policemen. And suddenly, from this little ditch next to the road, a couple jumps in their direction. And they look very scared. And what's weird to my parents is that they are dressed in party clothes. And this is a couple that was at the Nova Music Festival. The terrorists had come there, and they slaughtered 300 people in that music festival.
We know that. Terrible.
And this couple managed to escape. And my parents took them into their car. But then they had to get them out of there. So they turned around and they took them to Ashkelon, which is a bigger city about 20 minutes away. Later in the day, they got delayed again and again. There were checkpoints. There were battles on the road. They had to navigate around dead bodies that they were seeing on the way. And at some point, they had to evacuate 3 injured soldiers from a battle that my father had participated in on the road leading to our kibbutz. During that battle, he ditched the pistol and he took the M16 of a dead soldier.
Oh my God.
After evacuating these soldiers, around 1:15, he finally made it to our kibbutz. They left home at 7:30. When he arrived to the kibbutz, there was a group of soldiers, and he joined them. And they joined forces with a small group of defenders, and they began to scan the kibbutz from house to house, looking for survivors, looking for terrorists to kill. Our home became somewhat of a refuge for people from all of our neighborhood. And in the coming hours, we had 40 people. It was a very different situation. In the morning, we were all alone in the dark with the girls.
Must have been comforting in some way to be with all those people, or was it just a balagan?
In one way, it was comforting, but it was also very sad, because when the neighbors began to arrive, we started hearing what had happened. You know, in the house in front of me, my neighbor was killed. He was a hero. He died in battle against the terrorists. I write about him in my book, Gates of Gaza.
What's his name?
Ilan. So those were very difficult hours. And around 11 p.m., we were all evacuated out of the community on a bus. And we left basically seeing it on fire behind us because the terrorists had set fire to our cowshed. We were taken, all of our community, to a kibbutz outside Haifa. And they've been hosting us very generously ever since October 8th. A year now, basically.
And how many people are internally displaced from places like Nahal Oz?
Right now, it's about 80,000, because some have returned to their homes, but not all the communities can go back. Today, the hope for me is that, first of all, we will get back our hostages. This is the biggest issue. I hope that we will get back Tzachi and Omri, my neighbors, my friends, get them back alive. And then there's the hope that we will go back to our home, that this war will end. And we gotta have hope, because if we don't have hope, why would we get into this in the first place? Why would we go there again and invest so much energy in doing this and relive the trauma of all the people we lost on that day? We can only do it if we have hope that it will lead to a better future.
Thank you so much, Toda Rabba.
Thank you for having me.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll document the rise of anti-Semitism here in Canada. Welcome back. Shots fired at Jewish schools, Molotov cocktails thrown at synagogues, graffiti death threats on homes and Jewish buildings, derogatory slurs, and even assaults. These are just some examples of a deeply disturbing rise in anti-Semitism here in Canada since October the 7th. Zoomer News videographer Maximilian Aoki is here with a look at the impact on Toronto's Jewish community. Maximilian.
Thanks, Libby. I've been speaking to local residents and leaders of Toronto's Jewish community. There's a very real fear that anti-Semitism is only getting worse and that it is endemic in some of our institutions, including school boards and unions. Let's take a look.
You genocide supporter!
Around the world, Jewish communities have been reeling since the October 7th attacks. Right here in Toronto, it has been reported by the police that hate-motivated crime is up 55% since last year, and that anti-Semitism accounts for 45% of these crimes, more than any other category. I'm here at the Kehilat Sha'arei Torah, a place of worship that is just one of many Jewish establishments impacted by the rise of anti-Semitism here in Toronto.
We've had our windows and doors smashed twice. The overall rhetoric that has been going on has emboldened and inflamed anti-Semites and anti-Semitism. We've kept this as kind of a reminder. It will eventually get replaced. I know I personally hold a lot of the national media accountable for how they frame things. They're pitting the Jewish population in Canada against the Muslim population in Canada. They're pitting one against another, and whether that's purposeful or it's by accident, it's happening. And that's causing a lot of the anti-Semitism, the unrest within the Canadian community.
The Toronto District School Board has come under fire due to a middle school field trip, which was publicized as a demonstration for Aboriginal rights, but reportedly became a politically charged protest, with students being prompted to chant divisive slogans. Members and allies of the Jewish community gathered to express their frustration.
Fire them! Fire them! They took them to an Israel hate protest rally. The ones that you see on TV that end with arrests and violence with smoke and police. That's where they took little kids as young as 8 years old. That is despicable.
Canada has very similar to what Europe was like in the early 30s, where the beginnings of anti-Semitism was very institutionalized and acceptable in society. The teachers trying to take these kids to this protest is not unsimilar to what they used to do with the Nazi youth.
I didn't see that level of brainwashing in the Soviet school that I worked that I see today at TDSB.
Given the public outcry, the TDSB took quick action to bring trustees together.
I'm here in the TDSB boardroom where the incident has prompted a last-minute trustee meeting.
Since October 7th, I think there's an experience of trauma, and you emphasize the fact that if Jews don't feel safe in our public schools, no one is safe in our public schools.
Some trustees are taking the correct steps. Still too little, but I would like to see more taking the right steps in an objective, non-biased way to look at how we're going to educate our children.
Let's be clear here. An investigation to a certain extent is just a pro forma operation. The video documentation is out there. The letters between parents and the schools are out there. The one thing that needs to happen here is immediate action to keep these children safe, and that was not on the agenda tonight and has not been on the agenda for the TDSB this week.
Ontario's Ministry of Education has launched a formal investigation into the incident, but as of now, none of the inciters of the incident have been suspended or sanctioned. Libby, back to you.
Thanks so much, Maximilian. Okay, we are going to delve into all of these issues one by one. Right now, we need to take a short break, and we'll be back with more of the Zoomer. Okay, so that incident at the TDSB, and I watched some of the meeting, and the acting head of education got up and made what I thought was a sincere apology. And then the next day on radio, I interviewed the acting chair of the board. He's not apologizing. He doesn't think it's his place. So what's going on at the TDSB, Warren?
Well, in the spring, they changed their curriculum. They changed the curriculum upon which all of the teaching is based to oppose what's called anti-Palestinian racism. And like, who's in favor of racism? Everybody's against racism. But, you know, just to give an example, forgetting about the Jewish community just for a minute, 45% of the kids in the TDSB are Asian Canadians. So one of the trustees, who's an Asian Canadian, said, well, what about the kids I represent? They're experiencing racism too. And they were told by the trustees, no, we're not going to do it for you. So there is an agenda at work here, and it's an agenda that is spreading across the province, Durham and Peel and other school boards, and we need to deal with it as a society, or the stuff that you've shown on the screen, it's going to get worse.
These schools sent a permission slip home with parents. Some of them said that they would not be anywhere near the demonstration. Some of them said they would witness a demonstration for Indigenous rights. And here were teachers leading them in a chant.
It's shocking and it's deceptive. And it shows that at least some of the people who orchestrated it knew that they were up to no good. Otherwise, they would not have deceived or said false things. But what you see is a kind of, as you saw in some of those chants, a conflation of a whole bunch of different issues. That Canada's an occupied country, that Israel's an occupied country, that there's a coalition of things that used to be quite disparate and now are being brought together, really not by being in favor of something that would promote the common good, but seem to be, a very destructive and disturbing kind of alliance of what things didn't used to be sort of allied. So it calls forth for equally vigorous common response for those who are appalled by what they see. After
this incident, the Elementary Teachers Federation released a statement saying and the TDSB, according to what most people here think, did not respond appropriately, but they said, we see the TDSB vilifying the solidarity between Palestine and Turtle Island. That's from a union. I mean, as somebody who runs a professional association, what do you think?
So the unions have no place in discussing or addressing these issues. They should be staying out of it. I look at these situations more so as accountability. There needs to be accountability here. One thing I'm finding, quite honestly, across Canada is a lack of accountability for people's actions. And if someone makes a decision that's a poor decision, and particularly obviously taking children to such an event is one of those decisions, there should be some accountability. And the fact that the chair is not acknowledging that there's an issue, that to me indicates there's a big problem.
Howard, you're a labor lawyer,
Yes.
and it's not just here. I mean, there's the infamous Fred Hahn, who cheered the October 7th massacre and who he's the CUPE president of Ontario, and the national executive of that union said, we can't do anything about it.
My law firm's suing Fred Hahn and CUPE. In terms of what happened to the TDSB, it's unacceptable that that there isn't accountability. The teacher should be fired for cause immediately who misled the parents, because teachers are supposed to be in local parentage, taking the role of the parents. It's cause for discharge, dealing with young people who are vulnerable in the way that they did. The board would win the case, but the board won't fire them because the board's complicit with them, and therefore the province should put the board under trusteeship, and the province should fire the teachers, and they will win their case.
You're suing them, but it's a human rights action.
Yes.
Those take years.
So the courts take years. Everything takes years. Really, a lot of these lawsuits are more PR stunts than they are real lawsuits, because by the time it's over, and you're right, they take years, the situation will have changed, the context will have changed. So the only real impact is individual lawsuits against individuals who commit acts that they could be sued for, who are not well financed by unions or otherwise, and therefore they can do it with impunity. Otherwise, it's just another public relations activity and a political activity.
Is yours a public relations, or is it?
To a large extent, it's public relations, yes. And hopefully it's going to make the members of CUPE wake up and think, do we want to disassociate from CUPE? Might we decertify our particular local CUPE? Might we join another union, our particular branches who are opposed to what Fred Hahn and what he's been doing? Will we vote and make ourselves new elected members of CUPE executive, not Fred Hahn next time? It's try and get some of these initiatives going, because realistically, litigation isn't going to work with the entrenched union movement.
Well, I think unions should be responsible for their executives, and politics should be left out of everything. And their job is to run the work life and the work experience for their members better. That is, to me, a complete abrogation of their responsibilities, and I don't know how this has morphed into all of this. It's just unacceptable.
The province has to enact legislation that does not permit unions to use union dues for anything other than collective bargaining objectives.
And federally?
For federally associated unions, the federal government would do it, but most of these unions are provincially regulated.
Okay. We will have to leave it there. We have more after the break. Welcome back. With the recent developments in the Middle East, where does that leave the hostages and their families? Their anguish has only deepened, especially after the recent murders of 6 of the captives. Now, some believe that freeing them is not a priority for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, no matter what he says. Maureen Lesham's cousin, Romy Gonain, was taken on October the 7th. Thank you so much for being here. And what are you thinking? What are you feeling these days?
You know, it's hard to reconcile that a year has already gone by. Everything still seems so fresh. Our number one focus is to get Romy.
Take your time to get her back.
And all the hostages home. It's knowing what they've been through the last year and what they continue to go through. We know that Romy is alive. And every second in those tunnels is a second too much. We need for Canadians to understand that Israel is a democratic country, and if mass abductions can take place in Israel, it can take place in Canada. And we don't have to look far to see the rhetoric that's going on in our streets.
First of all, how do you know that she's alive?
So any information that has been released to the families after November 30th, which was the last day of the ceasefire and the last set of released hostages, is confidential. For the safety of the hostages, and every family deals with it differently, but the only thing I can say right now is that we do have confirmation that she is in fact alive.
I'm very happy to hear that. The politics of it, many hostage families don't believe that the government has this as a priority, and that politics are trumping that effort.
So there's definitely different viewpoints in Israel. I can tell you that my family has faith in the Israeli people, in the moral clarity of the IDF. You know, the alternative is just being overwhelmed by the grief and by sadness and by being pessimistic. We have no choice but to remain optimistic. We believe in the faith of humanity, and we're just laser focused and working every day to get Romy back, and until otherwise, that's how we move every day.
We, of course, wish you all the best in that. I'd like to bring Dean in, because you're dealing with campuses and young people, and not only does there seem to be no empathy for the hostages, no empathy for the huge cruelty, the rape, but postages asking for the release of hostages are ripped down. I mean, the callousness is quite shocking.
I never would have thought a year and change ago that I would hear the words, as someone is ripping down the posters of kidnapped babies, oh, why are you ripping this down? Because whoever put up this poster of this kidnapped baby was doing it for political reasons. So I'm taking it down for political reasons. I said, but it's a kidnapped innocent. Don't you feel guilty? Like, don't you feel bad? Don't you feel that you were doing something wrong? She said, no, it's not my fault that this child is held hostage. It's the fault of Israelis for living in Israel, and that these people deserve what's coming to them. And that is the rhetoric that we've seen. We've seen it a lot. Anti-Semitism, we've had something along the lines of 500 incident reports at Hillel since October 7th, which is a 400% increase over any other year in the previous year. And we see it in practice, that very callousness, Jews are not considered a minority when they're alive, when they're in Israel, when they're here, when they're dying. They're not considered a minority, and it's really shocking, My grandparents told me about anti-Semitism being a pervasive issue, something that rears its head. And living in Canada, at least in Canada, for a long time, I didn't really reconcile myself with what they said. I didn't recognize that as true, but they were right.
Father Raymond, how do you see or account for this type of callousness? And not just that it's directed at Jews, that people can look at a kidnapped baby and have venom.
So you're correct. We're seeing it now in a very disturbing way regarding this particular issue and Jews in our country. But that kind of politicization of seeing someone else, firstly, as a political issue and not as a person, if it gets entrenched, and alas, it's become somewhat entrenched in our country in the last year, the consequences will be widespread. And that's a diagnosis or a possible diagnosis, but I'm discouraged because I don't really have a solution to that issue.
And again, as a man of the cloth, do you encounter this? Do you notice a difference in people who are young now and people who were young a little while ago?
Yes, in terms of what information they get and what they know.
Morally.
And, morally, I would people are. I would say people today, as opposed to 30 years ago when I was on campus, are actually more confident of their moral rectitude.
Whether they have,
now, you could make a judgment on confidence or misplaced confidence, but they have an enormous amount of confidence, and that's partly because they're hearing reinforced images or reinforced notions all the time. But that actually makes it a bit more frightening, because someone who thinks that this is not really a good thing, but I'm going to kind of go along with it, that's not good. But someone who has a conviction that this is a righteous position, even though it's quite a shocking thing to encounter, that's more troubling. So yeah, it's more troubling, not less.
We'll get to more on that too. That moral rectitude, there's a lot of it on the left, but what's your reaction?
I was just going to say, we're seeing it even with people our own age. It's not just even the young generation. I've gotten, I cannot tell you how many comments online that what happened to my cousin and my family, we deserved it, from adults. It's not just something that we're seeing from the young generation that would typically get their news from TikTok. So I don't know where along the lines where society has lost its moral clarity. Why are they so quick to believe the lies? I've been struggling with understanding that.
I think some of it's the nature of the internet. You've got people are allowed to be anonymous. Yep. And they post things anonymously that they wouldn't own up to in name and in person. Yep. And that is so widespread and so mean-spirited. And then you've got a candidate like Donald Trump who says terrible things about people all the time, not fact-based and so on. Not just to pick on him. He's not the only one that does this. And then on top of that, you've got the Russians with their friends in their axis of evil who have bots spreading all these talking points all over the place. You think they're a person. It's shocking. Might not be.
And that may be a lot of the source of the news of the people that I interact with, either online or in person. This bot may be what their news comes from. But in practice, these people you exist today in an echo chamber, right? The algorithm will show you more of what you engage in. And that's a reality. So the more you engage in one particular thing, you're going to see nothing but content about these things that matter to you. And there is an audience that will happily listen to this and engage with this, because there is a large audience in this world that, whether Israel existed or not today, has a grudge, personal, religious conviction, spiritual, whatever, against the Jewish people. And so events like these allow for an excuse. And we've seen it with the rise of populists writ large on Twitter and in government all over the world, A lie can travel around the world before the truth has the chance to put on its pants. And that's what we're seeing here,
Israel's getting destroyed online. Israel has not taken this threat seriously. Hamas has a team of 160 people in Gaza working social media alone every single day. They have 250,000 people they can rely upon to provide an echo chamber for the stuff that they churn out, which is all lies. Israel's nowhere fighting that. We're not fighting that as a society. So the dramatic change that's taken place is something we all have in our pockets, in our purses, and we need to take it more seriously than we're doing, because we are being beaten by these people.
Okay, we need to leave it there. When we come back, we take a look at how the police have been handling the growing protests. That's next. Welcome back. The rise of anti-Semitism is not only occurring here in Canada, but around the world. Anti-Israel protests are happening in London, Paris, and New York, leaving many Jewish communities feeling vulnerable, unsafe, and unprotected. Some countries, like Germany, are dealing with the fight against anti-Semitism forcefully with a zero-tolerance policy. However, here in Toronto, there's been criticism of the police for failure to charge protesters who break the law. Earlier this year, at a protest at the Avenue Road overpass over Highway 401, police officers were seen passing coffee and donuts to anti-Israel demonstrators. Now, Toronto police have reacted to identify and charge 2 suspects who allegedly assaulted police and spat at police during an anti-Israel protest in Toronto on September 11th, and they are trying to identify one more. John, I have to say, I feel really badly for thinking this, but when I heard about those incidents, I thought, finally, the cops might do something, because they're the ones being assaulted.
So the officers have actually been going out and arresting people. And you have to understand, a lot of the times when you're with large gatherings of people, most ordinarily our people are outnumbered by hundreds of people. So if there's an instance where there's an imminent threat, obviously our officers will go in and deal with it. If it's something which they can deal with later, through body cam video or further investigation, that's another path for them as well. I think what we've seen progress since these protests started, and keep in mind there's been over 1,000 of these protests, is that we've seen a progression now. And I really do call out the City of Toronto from the point of view of the support. We need our leaders here in Toronto to come out and denounce what's going on and make sure they're clear with everyone at these protests that if you are not going to be acting constitutionally, which is peacefully protest, you need to be arrested, right? If you're committing criminal acts, then you need to be brought before the courts.
Isn't that the police brief? I mean, I remember there was a conference of police chiefs, and they said they lack moral support.
So I know our chief and our command have come out, and they were clear in the latter part of the demonstrations that if you commit criminal acts, you will be arrested, and that has been taking place. But once again, I would like to see the City Council and the Mayor step up here in Toronto, support our police, support them for doing their job.
There are 2 examples that really stand out to me. So one, there was a protest where they blocked access to the hospital to Mount Sinai, which is not even a Jewish hospital anymore. But patients need to get there. That's completely beyond the pale and illegal. No one was arrested. And then there was a protest. It was only about 40 people, and they blocked the highway. And they were banging and damaging cars. And, you know, they weren't Jewish cars. They were, I mean, to me, that is clearly illegal. And you got to wonder, when there is very clear video, why weren't they arrested?
So I will never quarterback our folks for doing their job. I don't know the information they had at the time or what happened, or whether these people were apprehended after the fact. But I think it's important to understand that, you know, policing here in Toronto is very difficult. This has been a very difficult process to follow through, I think, for everybody involved here in Toronto. Our members are doing the best they can with what they have. But I will once again say that they need to have the backing and the support of the city council, and the mayor here in Toronto to denounce what's been going on and to support the police officers to go out and do their job.
That's an excuse for doing absolutely nothing, because, you know, Mayor Chow is on the other side. She's not going to give you any support to arresting her friends.
I'm not saying that they need her. What I'm saying is they need her as a leader. She wanted to be the mayor of the city. She should be coming out in the city, bringing everyone together. She's not doing that.
Oh, that's right.
Right? And I want to see that mayor step up.
Well, she's not going to do that.
Well, why aren't we calling her out? She
She's
should be
called
called
out all
out.
the time. But you've got to do your job and start arresting people, and then people will stop going to these hate rallies.
So we can only, it's a constitutional right to go out and protest.
Not to shout anti-Semitic.
Lawfully. Let me finish, please.
Okay.
Right? It's constitutional right to go out and protest lawfully. When you're not protesting lawfully anymore, at that point, yes, you should be arrested.
They're shouting hate speech at every single rally.
They're doing things that are illegal. Why do you, I mean, and we agree, Mayor Chow we're not going to get any help from that quarter. Why do you need her? If they're breaking a law and you're the police, why do you need that backup?
So I think the public need to know that what people are doing is clearly wrong. Without the support of government, people seem to think it's okay to do this. I've said before, and we spoke earlier, there needs to be consequence for people's actions. In speaking with issues as far as hateful speech, those are things we have to go to the Crown for, to get permission to lay these charges. So if there are charges where we can actually act on them immediately, we do. If there are charges when we can follow up on them, our members do as well.
Then publicize it so everyone knows people are being arrested and there'll be less miscreants attending these hate rallies.
Well, when they arrest people, they do put it up on the police website, so it's where it goes from there. But what's your take on that, Warren?
Well, arresting somebody for speech, I'm a lawyer, I confess. So arresting somebody for violating Section 319 of the Criminal Code, promoting hatred against an identifiable group, that's tough to do. But there have been other things that have happened in this city, like at Christmas time, one of these guys with some of his buddies around them, weren't a lot, wearing masks and saying, I'm going to put you 6 feet under. So that's uttering a threat, and that's doing it while wearing a mask, which is an additional offense. And the police, in that case, the police did zero. Nothing happened. So look at it, it's not fair to quarterback the police because I'm not there. I'm doing everybody else is doing. You look at it on YouTube and it looks pretty bad. The one thing I do know, because I've spent a lot of time paying attention to the bad guys, they've been encouraged by the fact that police in certain jurisdictions, Montreal and Toronto in particular, less so Ottawa, interestingly, because Ottawa learned from the Ottawa occupation. The bad guys see that and say, well, I can get away with this. I can keep doing this with impunity. And that's precisely what's happened over the past year. And that's got to change. And it's not just Mayor Chow's fault.
I was going to say, I understand the need to have the leaders back you up. Even as a Jewish community, I want the same thing from our leaders. But does the police have a plan if you never get that backup?
Yeah, so we continue to do our job. Our police officers are out there each and every day. Right, we're totally understaffed, once again, which isn't an excuse for not arresting people, which we do. And I think that gentleman you're speaking about in the mall, he was actually apprehended and arrested.
Afterwards, yeah.
Afterwards. At the time, I don't recall, but there was a large number of individuals in that mall and not police officers. So once again, we also have to look at trying to effect an arrest with a small number of police officers against a large group.
But look at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. thousands of these people descended on the place, and there was an adequate police response. They arrested people, they pull them over the fence, and they take them away. And like, there is a way to police this. Ottawa has shown that. Winnipeg has shown that. Vancouver has shown that. Montreal and Toronto. And what are the two things? What's the thing that Montreal and Toronto share? They share NDP mayors, right? So I know that they don't give support to you guys. As you say, that is absolutely true. But, you know, people do have a reasonable expectation of being protected and the law being enforced. And in Toronto and Montreal, they're feeling that's not the case.
Yep, no, and I appreciate that, but things have been changing as we've seen. People have been getting arrested at these scenes. On September 11th, there were several individuals arrested at the scene at that night. I think we're seeing a change now in police response. Now, once again, understanding I work for the union. I don't make operational decisions as far as what happens. I'm only here to speak on behalf of our members for the job they're doing. You know, and I think they need to feel, you know, supported also through staffing. And these are all things which will assist in getting these jobs done. But it's an important piece, and our members take it very, very seriously.
Well, we do support them. I mean, you know, you can see how many of them are on the Sunshine List. We support them, right? But like, it just looks like they're not applying the law that exists, because we have an ample number of laws to deal with these problems, not just, you know, prosecuting with respect to speech offenses, you know, unlawful assembly and uttering threats and uttering death threats. There's things that we can and should be doing, and other police forces are doing it.
If you need to make your job easier, shouldn't the police get together and advocate to change laws?
We do. Like, I've spent
Yes.
I spent an enormous amount of time trying to change the bail laws over the last 4 years. But ultimately, it's, you know, it's up to the government's decision. Right? The government's got to make those calls, not us. We just ask.
Okay, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a look at Christian allies in the fight against anti-Semitism. That's next. Welcome back. In times of crisis, Christian groups have stood in solidarity with the Jewish community, offering support and raising their voices against hate. But not now. Why aren't we seeing a stronger and more unified response from Christian leaders and congregations? Recently, Pope Francis strongly condemned the disproportionate use of military force for the purposes of retaliation. He said that all war is immoral, but disproportionate retaliation is immoral. Father Raymond.
On the international level, one of the difficulties specifically related to Israel is that the Christian community there, which is not big and shrinking, is entirely Palestinian, with the exception of a few hundred people. So the local Christians who are in Israel tend, if you want to say, not to be, or to be sympathetic to the non-Israeli side. In Canada, we have had, after October 7th last year, a series of solidarity events with local communities. There's been a long history now, several decades, of good cooperation between Christian communities here and Jewish communities. I spent many, many years, actually with Warren, on the board of CEJA. There's a letter at the moment being circulated by one of my colleagues at Cardis, Dr. Andrew Bennett, who's Religious Freedom Ambassador for Canada, against anti-Semitism. So I think on the local level, I think there are promising signs. Why hasn't it been greater? I think it's there, but why hasn't it been more intense and so forth? It's partly because the environment around this issue has become so politicized and toxic that simple expressions of solidarity with the Jewish people then get warped into political stands and so forth. You can stand in solidarity with Jewish people, you can stand in solidarity with the state of Israel without having to take a position on a particular policy by the Israeli government. In fact, in your questions there was highlighting some of those internal disagreements.
Warren, you're an Irish Catholic. What's your take on that?
And I'm a Zionist too. Well, and the Father's here, so he can hear my confession. You know, the Pope has said it's a sin against God. Anti-Semitism is a mortal sin. It's a sin against God. It's the most serious sin there is. So for me, there's no equivocation possible. It's just clear. But there are churches, Father D'Souza was being polite and I won't be, the Mennonite Church, the United Church, and others that have equivocated on these important moral issues. It's fascinating because historically, the greatest persecutors of the Jewish people were Christians. You killed Christ, so we're going to take it out on you. That's changed, and that's largely better than it was. It's not as great as it could be, but I think Catholics, for the most part, are quite supportive of Israel. So are evangelical Christians. But there is a problem. There is a cleavage within the Christian churches, and it needs to be addressed because the guys on the other side, they're wrong.
In our time, last century or so, anti-Semitism in the Christian world was largely associated with more, if you want to say, small c conservative approaches. And quite a significant change over the last 75 years has taken place, and Warren is correct about identifying anti-Semitism as a sin. But at the same time, we've seen something that's relatively new last 30 years or so, that on the Christian left, you've seen the growth of hostility to Israel and anti-Semitism. So and we're seeing a bit of that in all the controversy we've discussed today, because there seems to be a coalition of otherwise disparate forces on the political left, and that's crept into some of the churches that would take a more, say, small liberal policy on public policy.
United Church, let's call them out.
So that's, well, it's not only there.
It's not only there, but it's big there.
And that needs to be addressed. I think what Christians need to be very clear about is that you don't have to get sucked into a political statement or a political position vis-a-vis a particular policy of the Israeli government or not. But you can stand in solidarity, stand against anti-Semitism as a moral sin, and stand in solidarity with Jewish people and with the state of Israel. And that's not only, it's possible, but it's also very welcome at this time.
We'll have to leave it there. We have more after the break. Welcome back to the Zoomer. It's now time for final thoughts from our panelists, starting to my left.
I've been writing about anti-Semitism and racism and researching it for more than 30 years, and I've never seen it as bad as it is now. Measured in the things we're seeing in the streets, measured in what we're seeing online, measured in the terrible things that people are just saying to each other in everyday life. And it's not just an assault on the Jewish people and the Jewish state. It is an attack on civilization and decency and the West. And we need to come to grips with that, and we need to deal with it, because it's not just, as they say, when they come for the Jews, they don't just stop with the Jews. They come for the rest of us as well. That is the message I'd like to communicate to people, because that is what these people want to do.
I think that the anti-Semitism problem has been around forever, and as has other racist problems. But the internet is a big culprit. The exaggeration, the weaponization of information, disinformation propaganda, pushed out by the Irans and the Russias, has, invaded all of our lives and our consciousnesses. And I think we have to be very disciplined in what we watch, read, listen to, or repeat. And so I think that we're going to have this problem for a very long time, until everybody knows how to do good phone hygiene and keep this stuff out of your head. Good luck with that.
In my lifetime, and likely since the Holocaust, anti-Semitism in Canada and the world abroad is at a record high. I can't change anyone else, but what I and what we at Hillel have been working on this year is to promote the message to Jewish students and to everyone else. Be proud to be Jewish. It is okay, and you have the right to exist as a Jew on campus and every other space. And don't let anyone tell you that existing as a Jew wearing a Star of David or a kippah is a reason to not exist in that space. Be proud, Hinenu, here you are, and here you will be. 5,785.
I think that today 1-year anniversary of the October 7th massacre should serve as a stark reminder to us all of our shared responsibility, our moral obligation to stand together and stand against hate and violence.
We're in a battle of civilizations. It's been waged for a long time. Iran and Qatar in particular have been funding it for years, especially in the universities and the schools. And we have to fight hard and fight back. And we can do it in many ways. We can do it with adequate policing. We can do it with companies firing employees who spout anti-Semitic slogans online or otherwise, and it's cause for discharge if they do that. And if employers are anti-Semitic or tolerate anti-Semitism, that's a constructive dismissal. They can be sued too. There's lots of tools available to fight back, and we better start doing it, like the Israelis are.
I would say that the Abraham Accords of 2020, thought to be in 2023, soon to be extended to Saudi Arabia, which would have brought into a new Middle East into being. I think the attacks of October 7th were an attempt to thwart that. They've caused a lot of immediate things that need to be responded to, but my hope is that those who try to thwart this new Middle East from coming into being, even if they should be militarily losing now, are not allowed to win that victory, because that was a promise that's worth hoping in.
So I think from a public safety lens, I think constitutionally people have the right to protest here in Canada, but it should always be done respectfully and peacefully, and respectful of each other, respectful of the police officers who are out there trying to keep everybody safe. And that is the way it should be done here in Canada, was done.
Well, the Jewish New Year of 5785 began just a few days ago. Let's hope for a more peaceful year coming ahead, and let us hope for the end of the war and the return of the hostages and an easing of this plague of anti-Semitism. And that's it for us this evening. To get in touch, send us an email at comments@thezoomer.com. As always, thank you to my panel and to you at home. We'll see you soon. For now, it's time to zoom out.